Welcome to Networking in Annapolis. Thank you all very much for coming out. Today we're going to have an awesome presentation by the Miss Ruthie Bowles. And without further ado, Pablo Alvarado, could you please introduce our esteemed guests?
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure for me to present Ruthie. We met Ruthie a little over a year ago. I think the first event that you came out to was at the Iron Rooster one morning. And at that time, you had pivoted to becoming a Jedi on LinkedIn. And that's what you were specializing at the time. And now you've pivoted again. And as you have in your introduction, you mentioned that you don't settle for the status quo and you don't let anybody do the same. Ruthie is a mom. She, for those of you who do not know, she served in the Army and she specialized in Middle Eastern intel. She speaks 3 languages. She actually studied to be a linguist. I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce it right, but she speaks Persian, Farsi. Is it Dari? And what's the other, Pashto? And yep. So we can't talk about what she did because it was intel. If she tells you, she'll have to kill you. So
it won't be me who does it. I mean,
well, you'll get a knock on the door. You'll get a knock on the door for sure. But anyways, as she presented last week, wonderful presentation, and we're looking forward to this one. So with that, I present Ruthie Bowles.
Thank you so much, Pablo. Thank you. Yes, I will go ahead and share my screen now. We'll get this up here. So today we are talking about podcasts. Now, according to the statistics, more and more people every year have at least heard of podcasts, right? So I would have to say that's probably pretty true for most of the people in this group. And like I said a little bit earlier, we're going to be talking about pitching podcasts for guest spots. So this isn't about you creating your own podcast, but how you can, get interview spots on other people's podcasts. A lot of podcasts center around this exchange of information, the podcast host introducing someone to their audience and having great interviews. And this ties in with the larger strategy of authority marketing, which is something I do for my clients, as well as LinkedIn, because I primarily work in the B2B space. So I presented this to you guys last week, if you were here last week. But yes, I was in the Army for 8.5 years. I joined right out of high school. I'm married. I'm a mom. I have 4 children, 8, 5.5, 4, and 2. I started out as a freelance writer, but now I'm a content consultant. So I create strategy as well as the content itself. And I quit my intelligence job in 2018. So that was after I got out of the Army. I became a federal contractor. And I quit my job after having my 4th child to take my business full time. And so I wanted to show you guys a little bit of a different side of me. So this is another picture I took just, I think, earlier this week. That's actually my youngest brother. He's visiting right now to kind of to help me out, help me and my husband out with the kids. We live on 2 acres in Crownsville, and I've got 3 goats, 4 ducks, 12 chickens. That's not, too many chickens for my 10 fingers, and 12 chickens. So we were foraging for wineberries because 'tis the season and they're delicious. So that is a bit more about me and something just a little bit different in case you saw me present last week. So I like to use numbers to kind of justify the why and the business why. And so I wanted to walk you through some podcast statistics. Now, these statistics, most of the articles that present these statistics are generally aimed at people wondering if they should start a podcast. But if you're looking to guest on podcasts, then they're just as relevant for you because you're going to be leveraging, the explosion of growth and the general interest as well if guest podcasting is something that you want to do. So first things first, over half of the United States population has at least listened to one podcast, at least one episode. So most people, now we're ticking into the area, even if they've never listened to one, millions and millions of people at least know what a podcast is. And I'll get into this a little bit later, but guesting on podcasts is still great, even if your audience doesn't generally listen to them because of content repurposing. So we'll talk about that briefly as well. Let me minimize this here. So yes, 37% of the US population listens to podcasts at least monthly. I fall in the weekly daily bucket myself. And just for fun, if you have one, you should drop your favorite podcast in the comments to try and, spread the podcast love. 49% of people ages 12 to 34 listen to podcasts on a monthly basis. So if you're looking to market to people in that general group, then, podcasting could definitely be for you. 35 to 54 is 40%. And then over 55 is about 22%. But don't forget that when you look at the intersectionalities of data, so looking at, industry and age would be like an intersectionality, you may find that those numbers, drastically increase or decrease depending on the particular industry. And then as of April 2020, there are over 1 million total podcasts listed on iTunes. And then there are 29 million podcast episodes. So when we say podcast, that refers to the show. And then podcasts have episodes. And then we have over 45% of monthly listeners have household income of $75,000 or more, which is really good, especially if you're looking more of a B2C direction in terms of how you market and the audience that you're looking for. So those are just kind of some stats there to just kind of show the growth and everything that we're looking at right now with podcasting. So why do people guest on podcasts? I found it to be 3 primary reasons, and they're overlapping reasons. So they're not mutually exclusive by any means, but I found them to be authority marketing, duplicate audience, and search engine optimization. So with authority marketing, that's, kind of my wheelhouse, but you're basically marketing your expertise to achieve business goals. And that is always really important for me. Like, we're not guesting on podcasts just because, you love to hear yourself talk. You have 24 hours in the day, just like everyone else. So every marketing decision that you make should be tied back to a business goal. And then studies show that higher perceived authority correlates to more sales. And this happens in 2 ways. When you're perceived as having higher authority, you can charge more, but you also generate more leads and generally can get more clients because people look at you and they say, oh, like this person knows what they're talking about. And so this strategy includes content marketing, but also speaking interviews. We lean heavily on those for authority marketing. And then when you look at a duplicate audience, this exchange happens really well. I'm going to use the example of a product-based business and a service-based business. If a company that has, let's say, supply chain software, that's what they sell to other companies who need a software to manage their supply chain. If I'm a supply chain consultant, guesting on their podcast would work great for me because they don't do consulting, but that audience is still someone that I would want to reach out to. So the closer that the audience lines up with yours and you're not in direct competition, or let's say you do the exact same thing, but you're in different industries. So those are ways that you can kind of borrow someone else's audience to grow your own. And then with the duplicate audience, you want to use your interviews as funnels. And so you always want to have like a lead magnet that you can direct people to and say, oh, if you'd like to learn more, download X. So this becomes even more important than if you're just directly pursuing authority marketing, because it's generally more brand awareness that turns those into leads over time. And then I think you guys have had a few talks on search engine optimization. I know you've had at least one recently. So I'll try not to be too basic with this, but interviews often result in backlinks. Backlinks are, let's say John writes a post and he links back to my website. That is a backlink. And so Google measures things like number of backlinks, which is important, but also who is linking to your website. So you're looking for something called domain authority, and the higher a site's domain authority, the more valuable their backlinks are. So if I get a backlink from Forbes, I'm probably going to throw like a party because their domain authority is high. And so their backlinks are of high value to me. So search engine optimization, podcasting for SEO isn't really a sole strategy. It's normally accompanied by guest blogging, public relations, content marketing, and a lot of those things actually fall under authority marketing as well. So that's what I mean by they're not being mutually exclusive. When I choose to guest on podcasts myself, it's usually all three of these things, but I try to get at least two in terms of what it is I think I'll be able to get from marketing the interview myself. So, all right. Now, this becomes more important as you kind of build your speaker's portfolio, but you want to carefully choose your podcasts. You're looking for podcasts that align with those business goals. So looking at the kind of three main reasons I identified in just the previous slide, if you're looking to grow your audience, right? You want to increase the awareness of your brand. You want to grow your audience for business goals that you have down the line. You're looking for a podcaster who has a bigger audience than you. So that's, signs of that might be the size of their email list, the size of their social media following online, but then you're also looking for a strong promotion strategy. You want someone who has an engaged audience, large but engaged audience, who promotes their guest episodes. And you're thinking, Ruthie, don't most people promote? And it's like, yes, but if you followed me on any social media channels and you were around for season 4 of the Defiant Business podcast, which is my podcast, you can tell that I am very excited about each guest, and I promote them every single day because we have one episode go live each week. So that is the advantage for the guests that come on my show. They get promoted every day, and that might be audio snippets. It'll be social media graphics. Like, I am bringing my full marketing energy to promoting my guests. So somebody who's interested in, growing their brand awareness and growing their audience probably looks at, my strategy at least and thinking, that's a really good one. If your goal is to receive new backlinks, then what you're looking for is someone who takes the transcripts for their podcast, or at least writes a little blurb and posts them as a blog post on their site so they can link back to you. So remember, we talked about domain authority. Most of the time, podcast hosts link from where they're hosting their site. They can write a little blurb in that they're hosting on Anchor or Libsyn or Blueberry, and those are just all hosting options. But Google recognizes that those are hosting options, and it doesn't assign those links high authority. So if that podcast host also posts to their blog with the episode, then you're getting a backlink from their website. So that is something that I also do. I post every episode, the transcript, cleaned up, to my website, and so my guests get a lot of backlinks from my site, not just from where I host my podcast. And then if you're looking to generate new leads, remember, you're looking for that duplicate audience. And if you're wondering about your audience, that's part of your market research in terms of, developing and growing your business. You need to get a very good understanding of your audience, because when you're kind of comparing notes with podcast hosts that you've connected with, those will be the questions you want answered. And then you're also looking for podcast hosts who have a high level of engagement, because if you choose to make a lead magnet, or you have a series of lead magnets, and that could be exclusive video content that they have to sign up for, pre-recorded webinar, ebooks, things like that. You want to have those ready, but if they don't have high engagement in their audience, then not a lot of people are going to sign up. All right, your guesting approach. Now, I'm going to show you this slide again once we go through each of the 4 steps, because I have a slide for each step. So I'm just going to cover it real quick. But the first step is you want to define the podcasts that you're looking for, and you want to qualify them. So that includes creating a list of possible podcasts. You don't have to give the yes or no yet. And then research and qualify and disqualify based on your business goals, which were just in the previous slide. And then you want to develop a relationship. Your next step is not creating the pitch yet. You want to develop a relationship and gather intelligence. Right? You want to gather intelligence. So go ahead and connect with them on social media, review their content, listen to a few episodes, and then check out some of the past guests. Then you move on to the pitch creation. Now, some podcast hosts have a form on their site, and they're like, hey, if you're interested, just fill out this form. So you wouldn't even have to necessarily go through the whole relationship piece, except as a means to gather intelligence and make sure that you can create a pitch that is more likely to get accepted. But when you create that pitch, you want to focus on what you offer. And I'll give you a few examples. And then promotion and support. Respond promptly to the host's requests because they are doing a lot with their podcast. They have deadlines. And then promote your interview and support the host where possible. So let's go ahead and walk through these steps. So defining your audience and qualifying these podcasts. So create a list of podcasts based on industry or interest. And that can start from a Google search. Just do like a Google Doc or a Microsoft Word doc, title, link, title, link, title, link. Just create a list. Don't spend too much time on this because then you're going to qualify the podcast based on your goals. And so qualifying them, you might look at audience size. You might look at some of the reviews. If you go on iTunes, you can see reviews from the listeners. So that can give you an idea of how engaged, the number of reviews. And then some times you can find them online where they're listed, like top 10 sales podcasts, top 10 consulting podcasts, and things like that. And so if you're just getting started, you should definitely look at your current network. Check to see if you have anybody with a podcast in your current network whom you already have a current relationship with, or see if anybody in your closer network can refer you to those podcast hosts. So I have people coming up in season 5 and season 6 whom I didn't know directly, but who were referred to me as good connections. So I trust the people who referred them. So I'm going to interview them on my podcast now. So those podcasts, though, the ones that you can get with based on your relationships, those ones should get priority. And then when you're qualifying and disqualifying, you don't have to be super tight if you're just getting started. Like you don't have to be super critical with your pitch, no pitch decision. But even if you're in an industry where you're like, oh, well, there's not really a whole lot of podcasts on, let's say, roofing, right? Because Chris is here. Let's say you're like, oh, there's not a whole lot of podcasts on roofing. That might be true, but you have an entrepreneurship story. You are an entrepreneur, and I cannot tell you how many podcasts there are on just the entrepreneur journey. So that could be an angle that you use as well, or any, related industries. So there's a lot of ways to look at this. You just have to get creative. So relationship development. I get pitched all the time, LinkedIn, my email, from people I don't know. And in addition to them generally not writing the pitches very well, part of it is I don't know you and you haven't taken the time. I can tell that, you probably haven't even listened to a podcast episode. And that is one of the things I recommend you do. Once you've made your pitch, no pitch decision, you want to review at least 1 or 2 past episodes and take a look at the most recent guests, let's say 5 or 10. The past guests can tell you what they're looking for. And, I've pitched podcasts where I'm like, oh, I'm a content marketing consultant and they just recently had one on. How can I differentiate myself in my pitch? If I hadn't reviewed the guests, I wouldn't have been able to make that distinction. Oh, that consultant does B2C and in their, interview, they focused on X. Okay, well, I do B2B and I can focus on LinkedIn. Right? So I can put that in my pitch ahead of time and kind of eliminate some of that work. Review their social media, because that'll also give you an idea of how well they promote, right? So if you've said, yeah, I'm going to pitch them and then see that they don't really promote, well, then maybe they get moved to the other category. And then engage with their content, particularly on LinkedIn. Most content doesn't receive any comments. Most of the stuff in your feed that you see is representative of a very small percentage of content on LinkedIn. And this is true for a lot of platforms. Most people's content don't get comments. So if you're on a platform where the podcast host doesn't necessarily get a lot, now you've gotten some attention. Now, pitch creation. When you're creating a pitch, try and match the energy of the podcast host's content and their show. So if they're super high energy and they're, maybe they're more like me, right? They're like, yeah, defy the status quo. Like, definitely we do everything, abnormal over here. Like all about the differences. I want to try and match that when I reach out. Now, if they seem to be a bit more reserved on their podcast, this is where you have to, for me at least, right? Because I'm not a very reserved person. But what I try to do is moderate a little bit while still showing my personality. So some of this takes practice. And so if you're creating a pitch and you're not certain that it really nails it, feel free to send it to somebody and get their feedback. Like, hey, what do you think when you see this pitch? But you want to showcase your experience and your talents as they would bring value to the host. and their audience. So instead of, saying, oh, I have, 20 years of experience in such and such industry. Okay, why does the podcast host care about that? I have 20 years of experience in this industry, which means that I have a lot of stories that I can share with your audience. Okay, why do we care about stories? And that, I feel like when you have that many years of experience, when that's one of your advantages, I always love leading with stories. And that's what I do with my clients, because when we start hearing a story, if it's interesting, we want to hear it till the end. Like if I tell you a few days ago, while we were outside with the kids and the kids were playing in the pool, I looked over and there was a snake wrapped around one of my ducks, right? Like, what? And then these ducks are silent ducks. So it was like watching a silent movie of wrestling. And now you want to hear what happened, right? Like you have all these questions. The duck is fine. My husband saved her. Yay. But that is a story. And you were like, well, at least tell us if the duck made it. Yes, the duck made it. But so that's how you kind of want to showcase what it is that you do. You want to look at it through the lens of, why does the host care? Why does the audience care? When I craft my pitches, I tell them about my marketing strategy for my guest episodes, because I bring just as much energy to my guest interviews as I do for my own podcast. Podcast hosts really like that because they put in a lot of work. So if you can assure them that you're going to share it independently and you're going to really be there when they promote, then that definitely puts some points in your favor. And that's what I'm talking about, is promotion and support. So a critical weakness of most podcast guests, and I see this all the time, is their failure to support the host. So they did the interview, they got what they wanted, and now they're out. Right? That's not the way you want to do it, because podcast hosts tend to meet up with other podcast hosts. So if you ever ask them, hey, is there anyone you can refer me to, in terms of who's looking for guests, you want them to say yes. But as a podcast host, if I know that you didn't really, promote or anything, I'm not going to pass you on to my other podcast host friend so you can also not promote your interview with them. So this is also shown in terms of lack of support when you don't respond promptly to their requests, whether that's for your headshot or a little bit more information. If you are slow to respond to those sorts of things, it can, put a delay or put a rush on the host's work. And let me tell you, like having your own podcast is not as easy as a lot of these articles and stuff want to make it sound. Like it's like, oh, start your own podcast, 1, 2, 3. But I mean, there's audio editing, there's finding the guests, there's processing all of that stuff, and there's marketing afterwards. That is work. So you can show your support by responding promptly and marketing your interview. So just make sure you acknowledge the host's hard work, and you do that by supporting them even after your interview. So when they've got other guests on, comment on those. And that will, kind of encourage and develop that relationship. Some podcast hosts, when they've gone through, let's say they hit 100 episodes, they may look at bringing people back on their show. You want to be one of those people. So this, again, like I said, I was going to show this slide again. These are the steps that we just went through: define and qualify, develop the relationship, pitch creation, and promotion and support. So, and particularly that promotion piece, I like to promote the week after the host does. So I always go and comment on all of the host posts when they talk about my interview, but I promote it to my audience usually like a week or two after to kind of continue the listens and the love. And then I also put it on my calendar to promote, probably three to five times more in the next 6 to 12 months. So I just keep bringing it back up. So there's a lot of ways to do that. And that's what I'm talking about with content repurposing. Even if, like John, he, let's say he doesn't listen to any of my podcast episodes, but he's always on Facebook, always on LinkedIn or Instagram, commenting on my posts about my podcast episodes. My guests do see that, right? And I see that. And that is, that's part of supporting, right? Like if you never listen to a podcast episode, but you're always engaging and you see that I've repurposed the content, I'll do audio snippets. So maybe you have something to say about an audio snippet. Your support in that regard is just as valuable. So it's not like you have to go, far above and beyond necessarily to show your continued support. But when you see other episodes and when you want to repurpose your own interviews, you can do things like quotes, You can do graphics based on your interview. Audio snippets are another option. And that's a way to create social media content out of this large, longer form content piece. So, and I've got more resources for you. So guesting on podcasts is part of an authority marketing strategy, because you're getting in front of an audience who either you think can be, leads for you, or maybe they could refer you, they could connect you to bigger opportunities, but you're marketing your expertise to generate more leads. I've got an ebook on my site, and I will post it in the Facebook group, but it's over 5,000 words on this entire authority marketing strategy that I've developed. And then also, if you just go on my website, defythestatusquo.com, on the blog and search podcast, you'll find 2 episodes directly related to podcasts, but plenty on authority marketing and content marketing. And then please feel free to connect with me on social media. I'm posting a lot of content all the time. And that is what I have for you today.
Great takeaways, Ruthie. For
Any
me,
questions?
can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. For me, I picked up a couple big things there. Make sure it's worth your time to even go on, meaning I don't really, now that you've just discussed this, unless they're going to blog about it and give me a backlink from their website, it's kind of like, what are you doing? Are you just putting up videos and just kind of, showing up and throwing up, just because you're doing video after video after video. And back to your point about actually hosting, I bet you spend, for every 1 hour recording, I bet you spend 2, 3, 4 hours in prepping and marketing, so even the 1 episode a month is a lot of work out of your 40-hour work week.
Yes.
Yeah, it is. And I'm a big promoter. Like, I always want my videos and my podcasts to get the most likes and views and everything. So, but I do notice that, we've got a lot of people going online right now doing Facebook interviews. But if you go back and you look at the video views, it's in the dozens. And if you go and look at the YouTube views, they're usually under 10 views, and that's a balance of the person hosting is not doing a really good job promoting themselves and each video. And maybe they're doing too many videos and not enough marketing over their one piece.
Yes, and that is actually a common error that I've seen, is people are jumping on the Facebook Live bandwagon and stuff, and they're not actually able to promote the episodes that are coming because they're busy getting ready. If they're doing it 5 times a week, it can be really hard unless you've got like a team, right? But for one single person, or let's say even 2, maybe you've got a smaller team, you have to be really careful about how you use up their time, because time is a valuable resource. But I did an interview where I waited and waited, and I was like, hey, I messaged the host a few times, and then he was like, oh yeah, I decided not to do guests anymore. And I was like, well, were you gonna tell me? I was like, do you mind me asking how come? And he said, well, it just takes a lot of time, and it's just easier for me to just do podcast episodes with just me. And I said, okay, I can respect that. I've done episodes with just myself as well, but I would have appreciated it if you had told me. And I recommend that you reach out to the other people that you interviewed if you're not going to publish their content.
No, exactly.
So you don't want that to happen to you either, but that was like a massive waste of time. It made me really mad.
And you also see another classic mistake is maybe people are having, like you said, too many shows a week. Yes. And they're not gems in a rough. They're just rough. So you really got to pick and choose. Just because someone says, hey, do you want to come on my podcast? Again, like my mom used to say, you are who you hang around with. And how Google likes to put it is, if crappy websites link back to your website, well, then your website must be crappy.
That's
so you got to be really careful about their trust value on their website, where they're going to be posting their stuff, because it sometimes can harm more than help.
Yes. And I just want to, because we were just talking about too many episodes. So if you look at my podcast, I do it in seasons, and I do publish an episode almost every day, Monday through Friday, but I have 1 guest per week. So I sit them down, we do the interview, but the way I structure the interviews is so it's in 4 to 5 distinct topics, and I publish 1 each day. So I promote the week ahead of time, right? So like we're getting ready to start season 5. So I'm like, hey, this is my guest this week. this week and this week. But every day I'm still talking about the same person, which is why it works. I'm not talking about a different person every day.
Yeah. So
And I keep those episodes between 10 and 15 minutes. So it's not an hour every day. In case you're thinking, should I listen to Ruthie's podcast? The answer is yes.
Because it's only 10 or 15 minutes.
Oh, and I'm frozen.
Well, Ruthie,
Yep,
you just touched on what I was going to ask you. You know, if we do decide to go this route with podcasts, how long should they be? Because I don't know that anybody's going to have the bandwidth for an hour podcast.
That's true. So what typically happens, and if any of you listen to podcasts, feel free to say anything about your habits. But what I usually do is I have a list of the podcasts that I've subscribed to, and they just kind of queue up. And when I've got time, I hit play. And when, I'm done folding laundry or I'm done with my walk, I hit pause. So I don't necessarily go all the way through one podcast, depending on how long it is. But I've gotten really good feedback from my format of doing these shorter episodes. People seem to retain the information better because it's focused on one topic, and it's easier for them to go through my backlog of content to see which topics are of most interest to them. But I would say if you're getting interviewed, I would expect it to take probably at least an hour. And then the final product may be somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes, depending on how they edit.
Mm-hmm. How much they edit.
Yeah, and how much they edit. So for me, I try to, because the episodes are usually shorter, I do try to keep, like I said, I purposely try to keep it under 15 minutes. I do the work of taking out a lot of our ums and uhs and, oh, I just said that wrong. And I'm like, it's fine. We're recording. I'll cut it out. So that's that's pretty much the level of editing that I do. But not everybody does it that way, and it's a little bit more ad hoc for some, or maybe it's even more polished for others. It really just depends. And then just keep in mind that with podcasts, you can usually embed them as well. So you can take the embed code, and if you want to write a blog, right, you're not like stealing it, but if you wanted to write a blog about like, hey, I wanted to go further in depth on this particular point during this interview, you could embed your own episode on your own website. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And still talk about that content. So there's a lot of ways to repurpose that.
The host episode and host it on your website. You can take the host episode and email it to your fans.
Yes. Share the link.
Pablo, you made me think of something because Pablo's Mr. Preparedness and Mr. Consistent. So I think that you have to be consistent in your marketing and your sales strategy. And we talked about that, right, Ruthie?
Yep.
So this would be something that you would put down on your sales to-dos. Maybe you're going to do one guest appearance a month, and that's something that's measurable.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that's, like you said, smarter goals.
Yes.
Like SMART goals. It's measurable. You can do all these, and it's not overwhelming.
Right.
So again, if you're gonna get serious about being a guest, then just put it in part of your tasks where you might have to reach out or try to, apply to be
mm-hmm.
on a podcast. Maybe you have to apply 3 times to get one, but it's the same thing as having one-on-ones. But I wouldn't suggest necessarily willy-nilly just going out and doing a whole bunch, and because again, that's just going to be a big pile of rough. No gems.
And like one podcast interview doesn't necessarily prove a whole lot to people, but I've had people who are like, Ruthie, I feel like you're doing podcast interviews all the time right now. Or I saw that you were, that American Express article where they, cited you as a source and this and this, like these things pile up. So when I say pile up, you build that momentum. So now, like I did my first guest interview in March of last year, right? But now I do have my own podcast, but I've done, I think like 6 or 7 interviews where I've been a guest. I've gotten, I think, almost 30, article contributions and things. So people are like, I see you everywhere all the time. Like you're speaking a lot and you're doing these things. So each opportunity kind of enables additional opportunities, and you gain this momentum, and then your perceived authority goes up. So it's just like anything else. Posting on social media one time, what's that going to get you? Nothing. But when you continue to show up, then, you gain that momentum, and it starts to snowball. Like just last week, I got invited on a podcast. I didn't pitch it. The last few I've been invited on, I didn't pitch, so I didn't have to go do that legwork. I just determined if they were a good fit. So that's what ends up happening. It switches over, and people are asking you to be on now.
Exactly. And just back to the promotion one more time. I was invited recently to be on Hooked. I've been invited on Ants, and those guys do a good job supporting and promoting themselves. But the heck if I'm not going to take that video and try to get a Facebook boost behind it, email my whole crowd on the Hooked video that I did. I have 1,700 views for $30. And when I post your video, Ruthie, later today, I'm going to boost it for $20 or $30 to get hundreds and hundreds of people to look at it. The Ann Brennan video, we got 1,400 views. And that was me being aggressive, sharing it into all these business groups, posting it, starting a watch party. Like, I wanted to take advantage of the fact that these people had me on and try to get as much out of this as I could.
Right.
So anyway, guys, we're wrapping up. Does anybody have any other comments? But the birthday boy's got to get out of here.
Real quick, let's sing happy birthday to Tommy.
Hey.
For those who remain.
1,
All right,
2,
1, 2,
3.
3.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to Tommy.
Tommy.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday
to you.
Hi,
Another cancer. Yay.
Birthday, man. Enjoy it.